Dr. Angela Beers, right?
Mhm.
It's nice to have you. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it so much. What made you want to be a psychologist?
Wow. Yeah, the infamous question. So to be brief, it was something that I've always wanted to help others, and I knew pretty much from my door just popped open. Hold on a second here. That's pretty wild.
Does it open by itself?
Yeah, it did. It's really
Oh,
weird.
that is weird. It's very weird. It's like something
It
walked
just
in.
like popped open, like it was closed good too, but
That's crazy.
anyhow. So always wanted to help people, and I knew about psychology, social work, and all of that sort of stuff pretty early on because I grew up in a very unconventional way. And my birth mother and birth father had a lot of intergenerational trauma and had a lot of PTSD and a lot of substance abuse issues. And, two coexes, two individuals meeting up,
Yeah.
colliding, not the very greatest thing. And so watching my mother go through substance abuse and all of the things that come with that, including losing your children and harm happening to us and having to grow up pretty young and take care of one another. I got involved with social services and the foster care system, and slowly
Wow.
but surely, all of us were taken away at some
Dang.
point, and I eventually entered care at 14. And prior to that, it was pretty much chaos. And so, I got to see firsthand what social workers do, what psychologists do. And
And this was all happening at a very young age for you?
oh,
How
yeah,
how old were
yeah.
you
My
when
mother, go ahead.
how old were you when all this is happening, would you say?
So, my mother was a really young mom, and she had her first child at 15, and then
Dang.
she had me at 18,
Wow.
and then she ended up having 7 children.
Jeez.
And yeah, pretty young. And her significant others, she's European ancestry, has some Native American in there, but it isn't anything that is tied to traditions or cultures. And
Okay.
there's a lot of identity issues in that family. Just to be brief. And my father is indigenous Mexican.
Oh,
And
okay.
so he
Sweet.
came here to America when he was a child. His mother brought him and his siblings over, so they migrated here. But they're from like the Zacatecas area, as well as oh gosh, on the border there. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but they moved around a lot, as most indigenous people do, and people of Mexico, to find work, to find safety, to find food and shelter. So eventually made their way here with his mother and his siblings when he was pretty young. But anyhow, he had issues because of the things that happened in his family. She had issues because of things that happened in her family. So it was kind of an ongoing thing in my life, with my mother being very young. She was an orphan for several years herself. Her mother was a really bad alcoholic. And so it kind of spilled over into our lives. And she cleaned up for a while and she got really religious. So she went from one addiction to another. And we had some stability for a few years there. And eventually, the relationship that she was in, which was my stepfather, that's a whole nother story. He had issues as well. And so there was a lot of infidelity. And so a lot of just pushing each other to further abuse substances. So it was kind of like a cycling thing growing up that I saw my parents trying to grow up and also at the same time try to kill themselves.
Jeez. Yeah,
So
that
yeah,
sounds
I mean,
like a lot of chaos, like, everywhere, you know what
sums
I
it
mean?
up.
There needs to be some order in that. It's
Thank you. Yeah. So that's also what brought me to psychedelics. The word that mainstream is using is psychedelics, and then there's the other individuals that are using entheogenic or entheogens. And so I was exposed to substances pretty early on. I had an older sibling that was a drug dealer, and that trickled down to me. Moonlighting that as well, wasn't very successful at it. I was a kid, we were kids.
Yeah.
It was a mess. So, experimenting with drugs pretty young, starting at 10, 11 years old. And
Really? At 10 and 11 years old?
yeah, my
Jeez.
first time I was
Pretty wild.
inebriated was 11.
Dang.
Yeah,
That's when
it's pretty.
you did what at 11?
Okay, so what first was nicotine,
Okay.
sugar.
Sugar, of course. Sugar. I feel like sugar is probably the number one thing.
Sugar,
for everybody.
nicotine.
Have you seen that video of a kid and a father, and they have like a sugar-free household, and he hands the child like a blue soda thing, and
Oh,
the
wow.
mother's away. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a funny video, and the father lets the kid take a sip out of the blue soda, and he goes crazy because it's his first time trying sugar, and he's like, "Oh, this is so good," and he just like goes crazy about some other stuff. But yeah, he's just triggered my thought. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. And it's true. Sugar it's addictive, it's destructive, it's joyful.
Yeah, it is.
And in moderation, it's a good thing.
Yeah, everything in
but-
moderation can be well for somebody, but
Yeah.
everything is used out of context in moderation nowadays. So
Mhm.
people need to like figure out how to handle that, and it takes more than just themselves to realize what they need to do, what they need to change. But
Yeah. So to answer your question, the first substance that I did was nicotine, and then shortly after that, it was cannabis. It was a little more accessible to me than alcohol, which is interesting. At least that's just how it worked out at that timing, and the first time I tried it, nothing happened. And so
I've heard
didn't
I've
think
heard that
anything-
for like a lot of people.
I mean, I was 10.
Okay, yeah,
I'm not
especially
sure
when
what
you're
I was
10.
supposed
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I was supposed to know was going to happen. I saw
Yeah.
other people reacting towards it, my older sibling and his friends. But so, I was like, oh, that doesn't do anything for me. And so then, unfortunately, a friend of mine's family member, without divulging too much information, had bought us, my friend and I, some pints of Malibu, blue Malibu rum or something like that. And I literally finished it off all to myself. My friend kind of got drunk and passed out pretty early.
Also at 11?
That was 11, yeah.
Dang.
No, that was 10. That was
Okay.
10 going to 11 years
That's
old.
wild. That's a wild childhood, man.
It's pretty crazy. We were at a house party with
At 10
adults.
years old, jeez.
Yeah, and
Like the
we
power of influences. It's awesome.
totally separate room than where the adults were, but there was no supervision.
Yeah, of course.
And it was like, you take this, and how like today, not to knock it, because screen time can save lives and the sanity of parents.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like that, here's a little pint for you. Don't bother me. Don't get in trouble. And just stay right here.
Don't cause us trouble, because we're also trying to have a good time. So it's another mindset.
So yeah, and then, I went back to cannabis, thinking that it didn't do anything to me before. So the next time I tried it, I was at a house party of our own, of my older sibling, and we were involved in games. And so it was a pretty huge house party. And, majority of them were way older than I was. And there was bongs going around.
Jeez.
It was pretty crazy. And I remember just never really passing on anything. I just kept. And so I woke up the next day completely blacked out, didn't know what happened. But, thankfully my brother at the time was like, yeah, you pretty messed up last night. And
How old was your brother, if you don't mind me asking?
he's 3 years older than me.
3 years older. Dang, so he's only 12. He's like 13, 14 years old, max. Tops. Wow.
Yeah, him and his friends were aspiring DJs.
Oh, nice. They're getting their experience down.
Yeah, and they all had older friends because his friends had older siblings, and so Yeah, it was really interesting. Learned my lesson with that. Do
Yeah.
not, there's a limit.
Wow.
But then I came across acid first, and it was a really scary experience, but I was curious and I kept trying it. And then eventually, soon after that, I came across mushrooms and completely was blown away and committed to pursuing whatever that was, whatever that relationship was. I didn't define it as a relationship then. It was kind of like, what is this?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
all of this over here is not like that.
Yeah. Does it make sense?
I want more.
Yeah.
So that, also informed, me wanting to help people. You get there. That also
You got some
helped
water
me.
in my eye. I know, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's that. I mean, from pretty early on, to think of myself when I was younger, it was, as you had said, very chaotic, and there was no really good stability. There was no real good mentorship. No, really. There were lots of examples and lots of good examples, but what meant good? What not to do,
Yeah.
what not to do.
Yeah. Like, I swear we live in a world of opposites. It's like, how are you going to know what's evil or what's bad if you don't know what good is? Or you could say the complete opposite. It's like, how do you know what soft is if you don't know what hard is? How do you know what's wet if you don't know what dry is? And you could kind of just say that about anything, really. But yeah, it's a world of opposites, and you need to experience both sides in order to know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wisdom. Yes.
For sure.
I love this. When I was coming up and I was growing up, I didn't have anybody that fit, the categories of my experiences. And so it was kind of like, I'm not even sure if I'm going to make it to 18 years old, let alone I want to be a psychologist sort of thing. So it was something that like slowly happened and evolved. I got to a certain age and I was like, okay, so I'm still alive. What am I going to do with my life? What's happening with my birth family is not an option.
Yeah.
Love them, but it's not an option. And so it was a lot of trial and error. And I was already doing these things in my own personal life, pursuing entheogens and psychedelics to do my own healing, my own exploration. And I was always trying to figure out how to meld those two.
Yeah. When you would go through these experiences, and I know you said you did it at a very young age, when you did them, would you be alone, like in a suitable environment, or was it like more recreation, like handed at a party, hey, here's this, take this?
So interestingly, the first time I took acid, so in our neighborhood, the culture that I grew up with, there was a lot of lack of supervision, parental supervision in the neighborhood. And the parents that did try to supervise didn't get really far.
Yeah,
It were pretty wild. And that's not to say it was the entirety of the neighborhood, but it was a good amount. And the interesting thing is the parties and all of that seemed to kind of congregate around and form around cocaine and cannabis and alcohol. But although there was an interest in a definite use of psychedelics or entheogens, it seemed to be more of a solo thing. It was like, here, I got this, you want to buy this? But it wasn't like, let's hang out and do this together.
Yeah.
And when it did happen like that, it was kind of like, the thought's always in my head, the statement they always say, that makes you feel wacky, that makes you feel weird. That's some weird it's some weird shit. And I'd be like, I like it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard for everybody, obviously, that not everyone is the same. Like, alcohol can affect me differently compared to you. And you could say that with any kind of substance. So when people enter this world of psychedelics, of basically magic in the mind, they don't know what to expect, and they hear stories and kind of rely on that story or experience as a, like, this is what I expect, here's the base. And it's usually not the case. Like, it's usually a completely different kind of experience compared to what their friend was mentioning to them. So yeah, it's different for everybody.
Mhm. Yeah, you really touch upon something that's hugely important in any of the work that an individual is doing, or collectively that people are doing together, or people in my position. There's sort of, these beacons out there of
Yes,
trying to help anchor people and bring back
seriously.
the boon. It's like remembering that
Yeah.
the experience is unique to the individual,
Hmm.
and that you have to really take the precautionary measures and setting the intentions to
Yes.
get an experience out of it that's going to give you and keep feeding you
Yes.
moving forward, and not psychologically destabilizing you or adding more trauma. And even then, when you do set up these boundaries and parameters and ritual, and you using traditions, those things still happen. You just still face your shadow, your demons.
Yeah. I read that on your website. You were mentioning the shadow and the work of Carl Jung, or Carl Jung?
Jung.
Jung.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool guy. Cool guy. I love listening to him on YouTube. And there's a lot of great people out there. Do you ever listen to Alan Watts by chance?
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
however you say his name? Really, really great
Hmm.
guy too.
Hmm.
Yeah, great people.
Yeah, they're great minds. There's always, the ancestors, the people that have come before us. And kind of going back to, when I was saying before, there wasn't really anybody that I could, like reach out and say, like, they get me, I get them. There's wisdom like Carl Jung and Watts and McKenna, and
Yeah,
the list goes
seriously.
on. And Groff, there's lots of that, and it's a Eurocentric and colonial mindset. And it's not that it isn't bad, but there's so much more to the collective. Going into these experiences that I've had throughout my life has taught me that there's so much more that we're not even considering.
Seriously.
And trying to package it into one little format, one little pill, is it's dangerous,
It is.
and it's destructive to cultures that have used these medicines to survive.
Yeah.
And people that are returning to reclaiming their cultural traditions of their ancestors many generations back.
Yeah.
And so, for me, not having anybody to kind of like look at and say, well, God, yeah, that's how I want to do it.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It was kind of me picking and choosing, like Jung. And then, I have a mentor, Dr. C. Michael Smith, who's also here in Michigan. And he's been around a long time, and he's been down in Peru, and he's been in Africa.
Oh, wow.
He's been, and he's in Mexico doing stuff
That's
in
awesome.
Mexico and here in America. And so he's, on the fringes. He's a fully licensed psychologist, and so he melds the two worlds together. But again, the work that he does is slightly different than how I'm trying to envision it.
Yeah.
And part of that has to do with the decriminalizing movement, and also in that, recognizing that the decriminalizing movement can be, again, dangerous,
Yes.
to specifically the indigenous population and their practices, for example, peyote.
Yes.
So it's kind of it's a tricky thing. It's still something that's evolving, even for me, being in this, doing psychedelic integration, psychotherapy, since really 2008. I mean, one of the first assignments I had for a practicum in my graduate school was in an inpatient setting with at-risk adolescents, female adolescents, a facility I was at when I was a teenager myself.
Oh, wow.
Come full circle.
Jeez, look at
There
that.
was
It's
still
like coming back around. That's cool.
there was still staff there, working there that were there when I was there.
Really? Oh my gosh. Let me
Yeah.
ask you, did they recognize you? They probably didn't. Did
It
they?
was interesting. I didn't actually recognize them,
Oh, really?
but my supervisor at the time had said that they had had a conversation with that person, and the person had remembered me.
Oh,
I was like, oh, well,
jeez. Yeah. Here I am.
I didn't dare not ask what that memory was, or
Yeah, seriously. Huh?
but there was a sense of like, good for her.
Yeah.
She's still alive. 1, 2, she's coming back to help.
No, that's seriously awesome. Like, I appreciate people like you, especially because it takes a lot, and it takes like a huge character to do the things and be a part of the movement that you're in. And it's really great. Like, I've heard there's this quote from Pulp Fiction, and it goes as follows. He says he's hanging out with a girl. He gets done with his mission, and he says, just because you are a character doesn't mean you have character. And that's like a quote that always stuck with me, and it's great.
Yeah. That's the stuff that makes you sit there and go, mm-hmm.
It's like, what do I want to do with my life now? Jeez.
No big deal. No pressure, what do you want? And that's something that you can, work through that. I like to, the word decolonize is unique to the individual, again, just like psychedelics are. One person's opinions and way of decolonizing can be different, strikingly different than someone else's. Yes. And there's the extremes and belief systems behind that. And in general, though, looking at this sort of what you're saying movement that we're all a part of, even you are part of this. You're reaching out to discuss this and learn more about it.
Yeah,
and
I try to do my best.
Mm-hmm.
I can, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And the more that we can expose ourselves to something that is different than the conventional ways that have basically, in a lot of ways, led us to where we are now. For example, with COVID-19, with
strange times,
being very rigid about things and putting money and profit before people, and taking the rights of others away, and it's all intertwined. It's all part of this system that's colonized, that isn't working, and it was never intended to work for all. And so part of like going into psychedelics and doing psychedelic integration, that tends to come up a lot with people that I work with, whether or not they're from an indigenous background or person of color background, or a lot of white people that I've worked with, it comes up for them in a slightly different way, but it still comes up. And they're faced with, what do I do? How do I decolonize my life? How do I step away from this stuff? How do I become, something more connected to my soul, more connected to the rights of others, to the rights of myself and my own sovereignty? And I'm not sure where I was going with that, but
you're okay. Yeah. No, I love this. I love what you're saying here. I'm sitting here and I'm learning. Like, this is knowledge, and I value that so much. I love it.
Cool.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think in that, with decolonizing, because I talk a lot about that specifically on my Instagram page. When I do get on there,
it's
decolonizing, to just like step away from that and not
seriously, you don't want to be too in there, and then they're gonna ask questions.
You don't want to live through the virtual world, although we're kind of forced to do that a lot now because of COVID-19.
Yeah, seriously, I've been, my number one goal with what I'm doing, like with what we're doing, is to do it in person. So like, this is my first time. So as you may know, this is going to be a podcast episode, and it's going to be my first one that's online. So I'm really excited, and it's something, and it's all because of this pandemic that's going on right now, and it's a new experience.
That's really cool. I'm excited, and hopefully I'm a good enough person to interview
Of
and get
course,
it.
you're the perfect fit. You're like the person I was looking for. Like
Oh,
seriously.
well, thank you. Aw, cool. That's, I'm honored. It's cool because like looking at it, you when you reached out and you said, hey, you want, I'm like, all right, that sounds awesome. Um, sure, let's do that. And I was thinking like, wow, I used to way back when when I was coming up and I was trying to look for people out there that fit whatever it was I was trying to figure out, you know, what that category is,
Yeah.
which is now kind of a decolonized psychedelic, category. There really, at least in my experience, wasn't that out there. And there's so much of that out there now. There's so many really awesome people out there doing
Yeah.
really good work.
And they're easier to connect with, like, especially I firmly believe like to be living now is probably one of the greatest moments to be a part of. And with that, it's really easy to connect with people. And if, I mean, not necessarily easy, but it's easier than it has been in the past. Like, back in the day when there was the internet or whatever, you had to like know where this person was at that you're trying to get to. Oh, he lives in California. I need to drive there. Oh, and then you still got to hope that you find him. You don't have his address or anything. And now it's just a message away. Like, look at the way that you and I connected completely to random strangers. And I mean, that's really all it took. And I'm great. And I'm really grateful to be able to do something like that. And that's what I'm trying to do really, is just to reach out to as many people as I can, and not just anyone, but people that I consider like special and a part of this movement. And how I found you, if you're wondering, was on the MAPS website, and
Yep.
you were listed on there. And I kind of just observed everybody on that list and kind of just grabbed, message a handful of people. And I guess the way I did it was like really different. I didn't like usually. I don't know if you got email. I think I messaged you on Instagram first,
Yeah.
and that's what I did really. Like I just searched these people's names in Instagram because I figured like they have to have an Instagram. Like who doesn't? And if they don't, that's all right. Then I'll use the traditional method, which is an email. But that's just how I did it really.
Wow, cool. Yeah, Maps has definitely been a source for people funneling through that are definitely obviously interested in psychedelic integration. Sometimes people find me through Psychology Today too, and I'm just like, oh, that's like super mainstream,
Yeah.
doctoral,
Yeah, that's really
psychologist.
cool though.
And people will say, hey, and then they find their way to my website, and I'm like, okay, now that's the determiner.
Yeah.
Have you gotten that far and you're still contacting me? Then okay, then we're good to work together, because
Yes.
I'm pretty clear and like, the things that the framework that I like to work from. And, it's never one size fits all, but these are the points that I feel, and the people that I've worked with, over the past, years, since again, 2008, that seems very critical, for an evolution or a moving through, whatever we've been doing for a long time that is not working anymore.
Yeah,
or
seriously.
it never really worked.
Yeah, I just feel like society in general is just so caught up in what's going on today. They're just so used to a go 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 mentality, like trying to be innovative, trying to, produce and come out with new things, whether it be like manufacturing or technology, anything that kind of helps society, but more in a materialistic way. It's always like, oh, well, like we need the newest iPhone. We need to work on that. We need to focus on that. And like you said, I feel like we're getting to a point in time where we're becoming more lost than anything. We're just kind of getting trapped in our own creations. And I feel like we need to take a step back and kind of analyze what we're doing and kind of look at the bigger picture, because we've lost that bigger picture. Our vision has just gone like funneled into something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Loss. It's huge. It's something that, whether it's psychedelic integration or just, psychotherapy, psychology, your basic psychology, of your mind, of your emotions, of your spirit, it is an underlying factor in all of the diagnoses that you want to kind of, you're going from a colonized framework and receiving services and treatment in that way. Loss is in there in every which way. And there are many ways to reclaim yourself, to reclaim who you are, to remember who you are. And definitely psychedelics, if done in an intentional and safe way, with whether it's on your own or it's with a group or it's with a guide, or if it's with an actual traditional elder, medicine person, or you want to call them shaman, with the select few people actually call that, but nowadays everybody calls themselves shaman. But it's, again, the word that is used and understood, on all the continents right now. And so it is interchangeable. And there's a lot of people who are decolonizing who have issues with using words like that, which are completely understandable because there's an erasure of, culture and traditions in that.
Don't you feel like that's the problem with words? Because words can only do so much for us, because words really is just our form of getting our ideas and thoughts in our heads to make other people understand and communicate with. And so when people like to be literal and get like very grammatically correct, I see it more as like an ego thing. Like, oh, it has to be this specific word, but it's like, well, do you get the point? Like it's a shaman or a trip sitter, and you also have to pay respects to the people who before us, or the new tradition or ritual that you're getting into. You have to pay respect by calling it for what they see it as, and that's just the way it has to be, I feel like.
Yes, very much. It's so good to hear the younger generation thinking about these things, and it gives me hope, hearing you mull over this and sincerely be committed to it, because I can hear it in what you're saying just by the description of like words cannot encapsulate
what I'm feeling. It's like when I go through these experiences that I'm trying to capture, one of my greatest like problems or goals that I want to overcome is making people feel what I felt, and making sure they capture that feeling, and pretty much being able to like not necessarily guide them, but have them understand on how to get to that feeling. And so it's just the work of practice and just putting experience under your belt, really. And I'm not saying like do crazy amounts of drugs or whatever. Like that's not how it's done. It's done in moderation. You take your experience, you learn from it, and you sit back and you kind of just go through it in your mind. You play it over and over again. And then because you know how you can go into an experience and you have some questions that you want to be answered, like, this traumatic experience. Oh, I've been depressed for 6 months. I can't get over this anxiety. And that's when I feel like one should reach out to these kind of experiences, is only when they haven't done it themselves through normal practice. So once you can finally say, I can't do it any other way, that's when you can go into these what you call like different keys, or take these keys and go into these different chambers, and finally be enlightened or open-minded, however you want to call it.
Open is a good word to use, to be opened up to more, to the possibilities or the potentials that are out there, the potential that you have within you, to be open to that. It's interesting, you said a little bit ago about how you see the ego come through, and I think I agree with you on that, specifically where people are conditioned to communicate only in a specific way. We have to reinforce these rules, but like you're saying, I got it. Did you get it? Okay,
Yeah.
then so why do we need to why do we have to bring the board meeting in here?
Yeah, seriously, huh?
Humans.
Yeah, it's like, forget the messenger, like quit trying to like pick at the messenger. Did you get the message? And that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. And so that definitely would be a decolonized way of approaching it, of like letting go shedding another layer of something that isn't really serving, it's standing in the way. Because if you're trying to get through in a very rigid way of how to communicate with one another, you're going to leave out a whole lot of other things. You're going to leave out a lot of other experiences that are just waiting for that opportunity because they don't have this certain way to look or sound. Or, again, in language, especially when you're talking cross-culturally, and with people who do have traditions, there's a lot of words that can't actually be translated effectively.
Yeah, seriously.
So oral traditions, for example, and they're oral traditions for lots of reasons. And, that's one of them that I see. Using the word drug, is very
scary.
It's very scary. And that's, again, this paradigm that we live in the Western world, that there's a whole belief set and ideology behind that. But to people who have been engaging these medicines and practicing these ways for so long, they don't look at them that way. They don't look at them as a class schedule drug. They don't look at it as a drug. They look at it as a way of life, and it's something that's a teacher, something that is so much more than that. And so stepping away from part of, developing a deeper relationship with these medicines, whether you're going to be a psychedelic integration therapist or just a lifelong psychonaut yourself, is looking at the words, looking at how you contain your relationship by using specific words to describe it, and denouncing or reclaiming that. Do I use drug? Do I use plant medicine? Do I use entheogen? Do I use psychedelic? And that's a lot of things that we are culturally going to have to figure out moving forward. What language are we going to use? What words are we going to find acceptable? And what words are continuing to feed into the dysfunction that, again, got us here, that took away our rights to engage these other realms of consciousness.
Yes. What is that? What are you drinking?
It's something new my husband got, trying to figure out if I like it or not. It's this is not an ad.
Oh, seriously.
It's just me curiously interested in this. It's a kombucha, a brew doctor. It's ginger and turmeric.
Ooh.
So ginger, turmeric, and black tea, obviously. It's kombucha. I can definitely taste the turmeric.
Yeah.
It's got that like pasty kind of taste it. So it's all right.
It sounds pretty good.
I love kombucha, but not all kombucha is equal.
Kind of. So with what you were saying, you were talking about languages. With languages, there's even emotions that can't be translated between different languages. And like I remember specifically hearing about some different kind of ethnicities in South America where they have like over 100 or something large number of emotions that they have words for that we don't even nearly have like half of those words in the English language. So it's like, what if I'm feeling some sort of emotions, but yet I think I'm sad, but yeah, it could mean something completely like, because sad can fit in any kind of category, or it's just like a general guideline, like, oh, you look sad or you look depressed, but it could honestly mean a lot of other things, like same with happy and excited or any other feelings. There's a lot more other feelings that I feel like I can't convey or like put out there for people to understand. I'm sure there's other people like that too.
Yes, this is a very common thing that comes up at some point in therapy, again, not just in psychedelic integration, but just in psychotherapy, trying to weigh the somatic experience, so that visceral, bodily, tactile feeling that you experience in your body of, anxiety or joy or, again, bliss or anger, and which, by the way, it gets a bad rap because most people don't know the range, the very shades of anger and the force that exists within that can propel someone. It itself is a psychedelic journey and experience if you go into it and you befriend it and you feel what it feels like in your body, and you start to really be your own storyteller on what that is for you. You develop that language for it, the description, and psychedelics are really good at doing that. If you wanted to zone in and hone in on something like that, the somatic, visceral feeling that you want to verbalize. And it's a process. It takes time. A lot of people right now are kind of like, and it's understandable because there's a lot of things going on and we kind of just want to be out of it. We want this to be done. We want to go out without our masks. We want to go get our haircuts. We want to go hug our neighbors, maybe not our neighbors, but certain people and friends that we haven't seen in a while. And it's understandable that there's this sense of urgency. I talk with my clients a lot about that. This, where are you getting that? Where is it coming from? Yeah. Where did that begin? How is that fostered in your life? How do you foster it? This sense of urgency of just speeding on through, wanting to arrive. Like, what does it mean to arrive? What does it mean, to have had a successful trip? Or, what do you do with that? And how do you describe your emotions and your feelings in that? It's a range of these emotions and feelings that you experience in these states. And the people, going back to what you were saying earlier about the tribes and the indigenous people and the various different languages that are in South America, it's plentiful. There's an abundance. There is so much there. And these individuals are closer to the land, are closer to ecstatic states of engaging and turning on and shifting into other states of consciousness, even without these medicines.
Yeah. Like, if you think about it,
they are closer to it.
Yeah. They are literally surrounded by plants on the daily. So it's like the plants live within them almost. Like, they are connected, like almost one together with their environment. Look at my environment. There's not a single plant in my room. And there's other plants in my other rooms, but the point is, like, even in with what I can see in your picture, it's like we're not surrounded with plants as much as we used to be in our early ancestral like times. And like, we are evolving and changing so quickly that we don't know, like we don't know exactly what's happening with us and where we're going, like when it comes to evolution. But with what you're saying, like, I really feel like these people have a closer connection to themselves only because they are actually engulfed in their environment and are proud and loose enough to welcome their environment compared to, I'd say, like the Western society.
Mm-hmm. And it's important. And we're seeing that, right now, what's going on, this is our office right now. My husband is also a psychologist and also does psychedelic integration too.
That's awesome. That's so cool. It's like you guys are a team, like a team of superheroes.
Like, well, okay. Sometimes it feels like that. Other times it's like, this is a huge responsibility, and we've got to keep, our humility and our humbleness about ourselves, and to not navigate this the wrong way, because
you have the power of influence, and the power of influence, I feel like, is one of the greater powers to have when it comes to this world, and especially, you know, our neighbors or just people in general. A lot of people can, like, not necessarily be easy manipulated, but there's a lot of people out there who are seeking a sense of purpose, especially with the younger generation, because there's just so much information out there that we don't know what to consume. And really, and that's like, is that a great problem to have, or is it a bad problem to have? Well, it depends on how you were raised and how you value your time.
Yeah. And I think that you put it perfectly, of how you value your time, and also what you see as your future. You know, how you want to create your future and how you value your time is definitely going to influence that. And so going, you know, to the point that you made, that there is a level of influence that people like myself and my husband have on people. And it's a huge, huge responsibility and commitment that's needed to do our own personal work continually, to constantly be doing our work, to do no harm, and to be of an ally, to be of a guide, to be of a support system, of a community. You know, a lot of people talk about like community and what's community.
Yeah,
and, you know,
seriously. Like, I feel like number one, do you feel like overall number one for like human beings is to have a sense of community?
It's a huge thing. If you're thinking of like psychologically, the Maslow's
like how we're
hierarchy,
wired, like tribal
the
times.
belonging of having purpose and feeling like you belong.
Yes.
Whether it's to your immediate family, or, you know, which is a community, or, you know, your extended community, your neighborhood, or, you know, even within your profession, your field,
your work, your school.
Exactly. There's the mesos and micro systems, the varied levels where you're bubbling out. But community is, again, looking at it from a decolonized way. Part of my dissertation research was on healing through non-ordinary states of consciousness using sacred breath work. Which, you know, it's in pretty much every indigenous or earth honoring wisdom tradition society, whether it's the monks who meditate and do the vibration chants and things like that. Or it's the people, you know, in Africa, the Icon Kalahari tribe, which is most notably written about in a lot of the, you know, Western literature, talking about them getting into their ecstatic states, their trance dancing, not necessarily always ingesting, you know, fungi or or plant medicines and things like that. But, you know, they use them. But there's all these varied ways of doing that, of getting into these states. And again, being close to that, being close to nature, being in this environment. It's a pretty cool office.
It is. You know, I love it.
It's a pretty cool office.
Pretty dope.
It's pretty cool. You know, if I was younger and I knew I was going to have an office like this, I'd be like, that's fucking cool. Yep. Super cool. But it's an office, you know, and usually we do have a lot more plants in here. Yeah. But because of COVID-19, because we've had to switch online to this virtual world, you know, to, you know, be responsible to, again, honor our level of influence over people. We don't know, scientists don't know how safe we can be sitting in the same room, even with masks on at this point. And so, you know, we had to shift, you know, most of our work at home, you know, because we have children. And so we took our plants with us. We don't want to be here in the office.
If they're not being taken care of as much.
So it is nice to have that connection to nature. But I had kind of got off there a little bit, so I don't remember exactly what we were just talking about with the connection to to the folks that have the language and traditions, the very different languages that, you know, is, in my eyes, far more advanced than, our society. We've kind of really limited ourselves in a lot of ways of evolving, of becoming good human beings. Again, here it is, community came back. That what is community? Like, we're fighting that out right now. Like, we do not know what community is. People are all over the place and having a really difficult time trying to unite on anything.
Yeah.
And the most basic things of like just practicing safety for one another. And there are a lot of things hanging in the balance, our freedoms. There is the words and bills and legislation and laws being thrown around about, forced and mandated this and that, and vaccines and ticketing. And there is clearly a huge division and difference between Black, Indigenous people of color, and people with privilege who are considered this white. I know white is this construct, but really no white. But
yeah, no, I feel you.
But what's community?
Well, with what you're saying, you kind of triggered a thought of mine. With everything that's going on, you notice a lot of people, and specifically like Caucasian people, who are kind of rebelling against the social distancing order and just kind of being like, oh, well, I'm protesting. Whether it be, they say it's a peaceful movement, but they like to push the boundary of, like, they like to ride that threshold of peacefulness. But what's crazy to me is, like, as a country, we enforce these guidelines and rules. And what's crazy is that I don't think the rules that we're given is that really that hard, or I don't feel that violated when it comes to my rights, because I kind of understand the bigger picture. But then you look at the people who are protesting, like, if you can't tolerate being inside, being told to stay in your house and not leave, and leave only when you need to, like, that seems pretty, easy to do and compliance, But what about, so these people go out and protest, like, okay, if you're that easily offended, what about like the children who are held in these cages in Texas? Like, for someone to get that upset about being told to stay within their homes, you could only imagine what other people are going through, especially with, families who are stripped away from, their parents. And the same people who are, peacefully protesting are the same ones who are saying, well, you should have known that you were going to get thrown back to, where you came from. So why'd you put your family at risk there? And because I get the point what the whole government's trying to do, which is, let's send a message to Mexico. If you bring your family, we're going to send, both parents back, or whatever family member that's, the dad or the mom, back to Mexico, and we'll strip them of their family and keep these kids here in cages in Texas until we can, find their real family members, whether they be in the United States or Mexico. But there's too many kids, to actually go through the process of finding everyone's family. It's too hard. But back to the point, it's like, if you really think it's just like a whole level of ignorance that I can only tolerate so much. Like, just speaking about it is hard to do, because like, you can't get points across, and you can't make these kind of people understand, because they're too engulfed in their ego and their daily lives and their daily routine. Like, I was dating a girl, and like we kind of touched on that same topic about, and I asked her just out of curiosity, I'm like, what do you think about, the kids that are being held in cages in Texas? And she said, oh, well, I don't like looking at the news, so it doesn't really concern me. But it's like, okay, I get it, kind of. But when do we start caring? When we see it in our little tiny communities, like within your neighborhood, where or when it's finally happening to you, like, when do we start caring? And I remember in my media news reporting class, once this COVID-19 pandemic started spreading, when it first reached Washington, I remember we brought it up during class, and the professor mentioned exact same point of which the girl that I was dating mentioned. Why are we going to worry about something that's not affecting us yet? Well, I said, well, it's the reason we do that is so that we can be ready, at least try to get ready, and to be informed of what's next to come. Like, that's the whole point, right? And that's something that just stuck with me when it came to that experience with the girl that I was dating and my professor. It's like, they need to go through, like, I don't know, they need an awakening. They need to wake up essentially from their little lives that in reality don't really matter in the bigger picture. Like, our lives, we are only like a speck of dust in the timeline of the universe and where we're going. So why be ignorant to other human beings, and why not care about other human beings if really we're nothing? Like, what if this is all just a test in this life to see, what kind of morals do you withstand? And these are all tests to see if you're gonna stick up for these kind of people or turn away from them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just taking in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Letting it
soak in a little bit.
Yeah, I'm letting it.
And I don't know how I kind of took that turn, I guess.
No,
it's just something.
It's relevant. It's relevant. It's urgent. It's emergent. It's emergency. It's critical. It's important. And so I posted earlier on my Instagram. There was the individual, Ahmed, probably saying his name wrong, and it's horrible. I should know it. There's so many things going on right now that the space for remembering a lot of things is having, it's being taxed, and that is not an excuse. It is, what I am experiencing right now for that. And so I will go back and remember this individual who lost his life's name, because it's super important to remember, the names of people who lose their lives senselessly to racism, and the white supremacy, this white supremacist context of the system that works, that people want to not acknowledge that's there, don't want to have to face until it's in, literally they can't escape it.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, because it's not funny. It is there. It's always there.
It's always there.
But it's how we choose to navigate it, how we choose to acknowledge it. And so this individual had posted talking about this man who's 25 and lost his life jogging and was targeted by a retired cop and his son who were whites. And
is this? I think I've seen this video when he's jogging in the neighborhood.
They gunned him down, and there's no arrest whatsoever. And so, this individual, I follow her. I think it's the Good People. I think that's what her program. I can send you the email, or I can send you a message on Instagram so we can have actually her. And I did post it earlier too, so it has a link to her video where she's talking about. She's a transracial person. She's multi-ethnic with Black African descent, and was adopted by white people. And so because of her unique experiences growing up in the world, which I can, to a degree, as being mixed heritage of Mexican, Indigenous, and European, it's in going through the foster care system and being multiple group homes and foster homes, some, that were privileged, and some that were, coming from the oppressed or mixed, Puerto Rican and straight up honky tonk white, Southern white. And so the experiences of, having conversations with people that you're in an interracial relationship with, meaning that there are multiple races, even though, again, that's a construct, racism.
Yeah, it really is.
It's culture, really, is what it is, but that doesn't take away. It's significant, it's important, it's part of our identity. And so when you have a relationship with someone else and they're not putting your safety, your identity, and your equality as a priority in the relationship, that is an imbalance. And that's going to cause issues and promote harm and promote the dysfunction continuing of racism and oppression. You get to know people, to develop relationships, to really get to know them. That's what we say we do. That's what we say is community, but a lot of us really aren't doing that work. And a lot of it is because, for example, people who are in the minority categories of Black, Indigenous people of color are, they're oppressed and they're afraid to kind of approach these topics, to bring this up with their friend that may have privilege and is completely ignorant to this and well-meaning, and isn't necessarily outright racist, or doesn't really hold those ideologies, but deep down inside has benefited from their privilege and has, in a way, because of that and not knowing that they have that they've contributed to putting babies in cages.
Yeah.
Because
the simple act. Yeah, the simple act
voted that way,
of maybe the simple act of not voting is action itself.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, just voting alone, you can only do what you can do, which is ultimately, first things first, go out and vote. And then from there, it's actually going out and trying to communicate with politicians, trying to, turn these directions of laws and bills that are trying to be written up.
Mm-hmm. Or you can take it a step further and you can look at it from a decolonizing lens and say, this isn't working. It was never intended to work for all.
Yep.
It was intended to work for those who have the power, who has the power.
Yeah.
And how do we dismantle that so that way it can be equal? And who do we need to be on board with that? Yeah. And what does that look like for it to be safe, for it to be effective, for it to be, laying the groundwork? And this is stuff that isn't going to just happen overnight. These, where we are right now, there's lots of theories about where this disease came from, COVID-19. And
a lot of conspiracy theories out there.
There's a lot of who knows what's going on. There's, scientists who say that this takes way longer to create nature, to create something like this, and that it can't just jump that quickly. And another one say, well, you don't know the power of mother, maybe. So we don't know. But what we do know is how our societies are reacting to it.
True.
And how individuals are continuing on as business as usual. And further perpetuating harm in a very dangerous situation, especially dangerous for those that are most vulnerable and at risk.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because of everything that's going on, not uniting together in efforts that are crucial and critical to all of us, especially the most oppressed, is even more freedoms are going, whatever that is.
Yep.
Again, words, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. To some people, it's getting a haircut.
Yeah, seriously, that's
to
what.
Other people, it's like clean water.
Yeah, like that's exactly what you're. Oh, that's perfect how you just worded it and tied it in together. Like that's exactly what it is. The definition of freedom, and everyone's, kind of theory of what freedom means to them and how they should be treated as. Like, oh, you got to cater to what I think is freedom. So therefore, like, I don't know. So therefore, it's like, may I violate your rights so that I could get more freedom in my own head? But.
Mm-hmm. May I violate your rights? I mean, honestly, if somebody were to say that to us, what would you say?
Obviously, we'll say no every time.
No, but
like,
that's
no,
what they're asking.
Yeah.
That's what some people are asking. And I think the right to protest, the right to demonstrate, the right to stand up for what you believe in is important. We don't want to take that away from anybody.
Yeah.
But if we're not thinking as John Trudell, Native American activist who is, deceased and has left behind treasure trove of all of his wonderful writings and thoughts, would be a good person if you haven't come across him, to really expose yourself to, really listen to what he talks about. It's so wow. He talks about being clear and coherent, so that way the actions you're taking and the repercussions of them, and if it's really going to, it's aiming for that goal you have, and what is that goal? And so, for example, these individuals that went and stormed where I live here in Michigan right now, temporarily.
Yeah, how is it over there? Speaking of
It's
Michigan.
very volatile. It's
Is
very
it?
volatile. I mean, for the most part, people are just trying to get back to life as normal, which was never normal.
Yeah.
But
Is it required to wear a mask when you go out in public? Or?
no, more and more stores are requiring it. And it's so interesting because, so to divulge and share a little bit, I've shared on, more private social media posts with, in other areas with people that it's not professional, that I keep, private because it's boundaries and stuff like that. Being a psychologist, we don't, need to connect in those deeper ways, even though it doesn't get too deep on social media. But my family has been experiencing COVID-19 symptoms.
Oh, really?
Since March 14th.
Jeez.
And so I'm 8 weeks in, going into 9 weeks, and I had it the worst. And the testing situation here was just a complete shit show.
Yeah. Did you get tested personally, or?
So it took 34 days until I could actually get tested.
Wow.
And
that's insane.
I was hospitalized for 8 hours.
Huh.
Had a CAT scan, had all of these tests done on me and everything. And
did they do that test? I saw a video where they stick the tube in your nose.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That looked really intimidating.
They actually swabbed me first. Both my one of my daughters, or toddlers. I have 2 toddler daughters, who first showed symptoms. And then it trickled down to my other toddler, and then me, and then my husband.
Oh, geez.
And so it hit all of us, and, they were denying that we had anything. They dismissed it all. They, threw everything they could at us, acute upper respiratory.
Oh my gosh. It's literally infection. A respiratory virus. I
know. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
So I've been sick for 4 weeks now, and you're saying that that's all I have.
Yeah.
That's all the symptoms of this and more.
Gosh.
But because I wasn't fitting the criteria, again, this rigid meeting boardroom, and it's a novel new, virus that's here. And so, but we don't have enough tests. We can't test you. And by the way, the tests are only 30%. They have a 30% false negative rate. So there's a 30% chance that you're going to test negative because 1, we're putting the test out too soon. 2, we're not swabbing you right. But they did test me for the flu twice, myself and my daughter, and they both came back negative. And then by the time 34 days came around and they finally had a test available, I had to drive myself somewhere. And because I'm telling this poor nurse all my experiences and all my symptoms that I've been experiencing at that point for 4 weeks, she just looked at me with her full-on suit gear, and she's like, okay, so paramedics came out to your house at 3:00 in the morning. You decided to not go to the hospital because they said that they probably wouldn't be able to do anything for you because you're not in really critical condition. But you did lose consciousness. You were completely full of your sweat.
Oh my hell.
You were shaking uncontrollably for, hours. You had shortness of breath, but didn't necessarily need a ventilator. I mean, just the list was going on.
Oh my hell.
And she's like, and so you're still experiencing, tightness in the chest and cardiac symptoms, and you feel like you're having stroke-like, symptoms. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, we can bring you in here and check. I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm like, I don't want to go through it again. I'm like, can I qualify for the test?
Wow.
She's like, yeah, you qualify for the test, definitely. I'm like, well, thank you. I'm like, not that I wanted to drive all the way out here to have something jabbed down through my nose. And when I got up to, it was the drive-through. By the time I got up to where they swabbed me, it was, okay, so we're going to do a different test on you. Didn't know there was 2 different tests.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to swab yourself. And I'm like, I just look at this woman again in a spacesuit, and I'm like, I have had the flu test twice now. And I know it's as painful as this. You want me to do that to myself. You do understand. I did tell you I'm a psychologist, right? like there are certain things that we're psychologically not really equipped to do to like force pain on ourselves.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be effective at
Like
this.
here, torture yourself. Come on.
I was like, okay. So, I tried as best as I could to swab myself. And I am still not sure why I had to swab myself when everybody else that went through was swabbed by them. I did notice the difference between the flu swab that I had and the one that they gave me. The one that they gave me to swab myself for COVID was shorter.
Okay.
So I don't know if they were protecting themselves and didn't really want to get into the car with me, like to lean in as much. Yeah. I don't know. That's the only theory I had could come up with that had any stock to hold.
Yeah.
But it came back negative.
Nice.
And the lady said she wasn't surprised, but at the same time, all of the doctor's visits and everything I had, whether it was telehealth or in person at urgent care or in the hospital, paperwork all said acute respiratory infection, possible COVID-19. So I was diagnosed with lots of other people that they were sitting home from the hospital with or without medications, Z-Paks, all of that. I've had that. I've gotten that stuff. They treated me as COVID-19 and they diagnosed me as possible COVID-19, but weren't able to formally get it together on that. And so, anyhow, going through that experience and seeing how chaotic everything is and seeing that, there's a lot of, again, stock being put into testing and using certain tests to give people immunity papers and just all of the stuff that's building up around it. I see why people are storming the Capitol. I get it.
Yeah.
But what I don't get is the arms. What I don't get is why are you arming yourself? Why aren't you arming yourself for protection, protecting others, and wearing a mask? Why are you putting on you're bringing a gun? You're bringing a gun to a germ fight, to a virus.
And you're trying to who are you trying to intimidate? The virus itself?
And so it's like this clash of it's just like, what is community? What is protection? What is freedom? What is safety? What are we doing? And how can we come together on this? And, and then you throw a little psychedelics into the mix. Definitely not with the guys who have the arms.
Yeah, seriously.
The guys with the Rambo style.
I saw it. It was crazy. And you mentioned kind of going around this topic, like back, I don't know the exact date, but before the 2000s, and it may have happened in the 70s, maybe late 60s, where that whole hippie movement was passing by or erupted. And then they kind of, psychedelics was introduced pretty much to our society, the Western society. And there's this whole theory about everything that happened with MK Ultra and Project Chaos. I feel like Charles Manson was a government equipped character that they trained so that, and he went through, all of the events that happened that he pretty much committed and manipulated people and created this cult. But I feel like when all this happened, with everything that he did, the media and society and the government pointed a finger at Charles Manson and said, hey, this is you are a hippie. Look at your hair. Look at the way you dress. Look at who you hang out with. You don't wear shoes or whatever. You are the literal definition of a hippie. You use psychedelics. You are the problem. Look what you did. You manipulated 3 young women to go out and kill people. And then that creates intimidation for the people who don't use psychedelics, who aren't hippies, and that conditions the same people who are walking up to the Capitol. And they were probably children at this time, seeing this on the news, look at these hippies. They use drugs. They kill people. And Charles Manson was that stepping stone, or kind of more of that image that the government has turned to say, this is why these drugs are illegal. This is why you shouldn't be a hippie. Why would you try to be a hippie? And all this was done because there's always a point and a purpose. It was done to kind of turn people away from the anti-war movement, because that's people were starting to wake up. Like that whole, like where we were supposed to be going, we were finally going to that place. And that, it was just a spark in a time to where people were waking up. They're like, why go to war? You know, like peace, love, and positivity. Like, why do we need to be out in Vietnam? Like, let's focus on our country. You know, let's help out our neighbors. Let's make sure everyone's fed. You know, let's provide for everyone around us. Like that whole sense of community was starting to kind of curate itself in this time. And that whole, and I feel like I said, like the whole Charles Manson and all these, you know, conspiracies or projects were put in like these areas in the country to kind of just say, hey, create chaos, fit in, blend in, and create chaos. And then chaos will eventually erupt naturally out of all this, and then we'll just point fingers. And I feel like that's what it is, and that's kind of where psychedelics took a turn, because after that, as you may know, all the research that was being done, like at, you know, John Hopkins and all of that stuff, just went to the trash. It was just burned down, and to, you know, later only be tapped in until, like, you know, or, you know, just a few years ago, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good points to reflect on in our history, our cultural timeline, the chronological modern experience of power and control, really what it comes down to. So to touch upon, you know, what you just spoke about, and looking at individuals that have the potential to influence, and that have a salve, a charm, you know,
seriously,
the intelligence about them that others are seeking, that are vulnerable. They're
who want
seeking
that sense of community. Those are the people who want that.
And the answer and the power and a belongingness and a purpose. And so individuals like that, that, you know, engage life in very dangerous ways, and, you know, touch fire and set fires. And then the government, you know, with its peering eye, picks and choose selectively who they want to make an example out of.
Yes.
Because, you know, Charles Manson, you know, the privileged white male.
Yeah.
And so normally I would think, because there's been a lot of, my husband and I both worked in the prison system, and we both sat with lots of inmates, women and men. And and
that must be fun.
Lots of people murdered and killed, and for lots of reasons. And honestly, it's a very small percentage of people in the prison system that are like Manson, that are like what you would consider really deranged and evil, and just rotten, and a need to be kept away from others, because that's just what their experience is in this life. That is what they're living out, and they will continue to live out if they're given the opportunity.
Yeah, and go ahead. Sorry about that.
So because he involved himself, I think, you know, like what you're saying, with psychedelics, you know, there was that, you know what, I am actually interested in what's going on here, and we're going to use this to our advantage, because you know what, psychedelics are a threat to me. Psychedelics are a threat because if they are used, entheogens, psychedelics, plant medicines, I'm a fun guy, are used responsibly, ethically, traditionally, that they can empower. They can empower not just individuals, but a generation and generations of people. And it can unhinge, open up, change and evoke change and real change. And if people are clear and coherent in what they're doing, and they're again responsible and safe in it, that they can creatively develop the answers to the problems we've created. colonization is created and our dysfunctional system that is operating on white supremacy and the 1%. And so I think that is super important. Like you said, that psychedelics was a key factor in that, and why this white man who's not okay who went on this really messed up adventure in life. I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but and then used other people and manipulated other people, and really bad things happen. And that's more common than not. And you don't have to have psychedelics involved, but because psychedelics were involved, became even more of a tagline, even more of a story that was like a highlight and a demise in the fall of the rise of people being empowered. And it was psychedelics were being used very, again, not the safe ways. There was a lot of other things going on too with Timothy Leary and individuals like that weren't being very safe, and they were getting a little bit too into the breakdown culture, break down all the boundaries. Let's just do it. And it's like, no, you need these safeties and parameters. If you look at the people who have kept these traditions for a long time, they have those in place because it is part of their survival.
Yep.
It helps them survive. It helps them thrive. It helps them live. It is a way of life. It isn't because we're trying to, and it can be, but it isn't mostly because they're trying to make it into a religion to control people.
Yes.
It is to be safe. And so going to these individuals that stormed the Capitol, again, privileged, the majority of them were white privileged men that were, knew their rights, that, were militia, non-militia, whatever it is, and exercise their rights because they knew it, and they also know their privilege. Even though a lot of them deny that they know that they have privilege over other people, they'll say that everybody has this privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. But because they were considered as good people by the power that sits in office right now, they weren't targeted. They weren't silenced. There was no mass arrests. There was no killing and murdering or anything like that. But in LA, there's things going on where people are getting into car accidents and are clearly in a heightened state of, as a psychologist, of shock, arousal, trauma, and there are other ways to handle people who are not mentally stable. You don't just open up and shoot on them in front of everybody when there's a car accident, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. But, anyhow, that's one example. But you pan over to the state capitol of Michigan, and they can just storm it. They can scream into these individuals' faces, which working in a prison myself, if you spit on an officer, that was considered charged. You were going to be charged, and it was bodily harm. It was intent to do great bodily harm because, we don't know if you have HIV or if you have some kind of disease. And so spitting on someone, it was the equivalent of hitting someone.
Yeah.
It was an assault. It was an assault charge. And so looking at what's going on in the Capitol there, I'm just like, these cops had, their mask on, but these individuals were right in their face. And we all know that, like, being close space with people were spreading. And so why weren't they at least ticketed for that? Yeah. Why weren't they given a citation for that? They weren't. Anyhow, they were selectively not picked to be made an example. But if it was Black, Indigenous people of color,
of course,
that stormed, and they were coming in there because they wanted free, clean water. Flint, Michigan, we still issues going on. We want some clean water. We don't want oil pipelines going through,
Indigenous
our lands, and it's select and choose. It's how they can keep the power, and not to go conspiracy theory on it, but it's very obvious. It's very obvious that there is a fight for control, and that, the people are struggling to find common ground and to respect one another's rights, and more so those with most privilege that are now starting to feel a little bit of an infringement, on their rights, or what they feel are their rights to freedom. And because they did that, to touch on what I was going to say a little bit a while ago, but went off on another tangent.
It's all good.
But because they did that, now the governor of Michigan is considering introducing a bill. If it's not her, it's somebody else, because it was in the news headlines the last day or two, of banning carrying any arms in the Capitol. So now they've messed themselves up. So they, by default, by storming the Capitol and exercising their rights, are taking the right away that they were protecting and didn't really need to protect in the first place, because they really need to show up with guns. They were showing up with guns and a virus fight.
That's the stuff that creates headaches, to be honest.
So it's pretty wild. We have a lot of things to situate. And how I see myself in this is trying to help individuals sort through all of this. We're all collectively going through this, and we all individually have our stories to tell and our stories to continue writing, and trying to be creative in the problem solving and the processing of the really crappy things that have happened to us, that are continuing to happen to us, and helping individuals figure out how to heal through that. And psychedelics is very powerful in that. But at the same time, if you get somebody that doesn't have their own experience of working through this stuff and their own things, or even being in a community setting, whatever that looks like, when they work with people in these profound ways, not even at the level of being an assistant or a sitter, but even working with them psychologically or psychotherapeutically or psycho-spiritually, they can cause some significant harm. You can't open Pandora's box. You can't send someone out into not to be light about it. Office Space, I think that's the movie, where the individual goes to his therapist and gets hypnotized, and he leaves and he's still hypnotized, and he just doesn't care about anything. And he just goes to his work and tells his boss to F off. He's just like walking through life like he doesn't care. And it's a funny movie, and it speaks to the core of a lot of the people of the American world and Western world. Like, I'd love to do that. I'd love to just not care about it all and just do my thing. But looking at psychedelics is like potentially being that one that opens with those keys, like you were saying, to go down this road can be very dangerous. People have significant traumas that they're carrying with them.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. And this is something that, like, I obviously want to be a part of this movement. And a reason for that is because I want people to do it safely. And that's the whole problem in today's world, especially with, the legalization of everything. People are relying on unknown sources or sketchy sources to get what, we would consider plant medicine or psychedelics, words once again. And that's, then arises the question, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I think it's entirely a bad thing, because it creates paranoia. And same way with, paranoia in a psychedelic experience, as you may know, is insane. And not only that, you got to think about like cannabis too, with marijuana. It's like a lot of people go through this paranoia, whether if they have it on them or they're consuming it. And I think and they try to say, oh, it's some underlying conditions that you may have. But I honestly feel like a lot of it comes from just the straight fact that you've been conditioned that it's illegal. You're not supposed to have it. You can get caught. Watch out. Don't have it. And like in Oregon and all these different, like California and Washington, all these different states where it's legal, I feel like there are less cases of people being paranoid when they consume these substances, because of the fact that they have stripped themselves of that conditioning of, it's no longer a paranoid thing. It's no longer something that I can't have. And so relating to psychedelics, that same feeling is there that whole feeling of, I'm not supposed to have this, like this is bad. So just alone trying to get over that like thought and mindset of I'm not supposed to have this is hard enough when you're going into a psychedelic experience. Mm-hmm. And with that, like I want people to do it safely, as I said. And in a world where, let's just say, these drugs are legal, and not just, certain substances, but let's say all. Mm-hmm. the government or whoever administrations can monitor and safely curate and build on these drugs. They can produce them safely, or manufacture, however you want to say it. They can grow them safely and ethically, with because I'm sure there are street drug dealers who potentially put their buyers at risk because money. That's what rules the world. Oh well, I want to get more for what I'm selling, therefore I'm going to throw in some chemicals that aren't safe, and knowingly or unknowingly, maybe they got it from a different source, are spreading that dangerous substance that you could perceive it to be LSD, when it can actually be like RC, which is research chemical, or like 2CB, something that you had no clue. And then until after the fact, where you looked up these side effects or symptoms that you're feeling, you're like, oh shit, this isn't what I was supposed to get. And that's the whole problem in today. And then the government, this is like a trigger for them, or like a point for them, like, oh yeah, well, this is why it's illegal, because look at the experience you went through. It was bad, right? Yeah, it was bad. All right, then I'm right. This is why it's illegal. But like, that's not right, because if it was legal, like I said, you'd be able to safely like monitor and like distribute these substances. It's safe for everybody and it eliminates that paranoia. And like eventually, I firmly believe and I hope that like in my lifetime these drugs will be legal, and I want to be there in that phase and stage to where I am well experienced enough and informed to introduce newcomers who want to, so to speak, like awaken themselves or figure out what's out there, the unknown. And that's really, humans are quite curious creatures. Like, the unknown is what drives us, like curiosity. Just, oh, what's on the moon? Let's find out. Let's put a foot on the moon. Let's put a flag on the moon. Like, just all that is the unknown. And we tapped into that curiosity. And there's so much curiosity in all these different avenues in our society, besides in these psychedelic worlds and dimensions or realms, whatever you want to call it. And there's only a few people out there who are a part of that movement. And it's scary to look at the numbers, because I think there's only 1% out of the entire population on Earth that have experienced a DMT trip. And not only a DMT trip, but I bet just psychedelics in general, it's less than like 3% or something. And the fact that that number is so low is scary, because it's like, why is it so low? And I feel like it's been built up, call it a conspiracy theory or whatever, to turn us away from these substances. As we mentioned earlier, all these indigenous tribes and rituals and traditions are being buried in time, like literally being buried, like clearing out forests, trying to get rid of these tribes and these languages and these rituals, traditions. Who's going to revive and bring back these practices? And whoever it's going to be, it has to be done, with like you said, like with responsibility, and with the right intent, with the right mindset and like morals, because not anyone can do it. I can't just say I want to be a trip sitter because I did it once and it was cool. Okay, that is cool, but how serious are you with what you want to do? Well, if you're pretty serious, read some books, look at the history, look at the like the revolution and the rebellion that has been going on since pretty much the beginning of these practices. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm there with you. I'm totally there with you. You said a lot.
Yeah.
I can't disagree with it. And it's a concern. And I think what I could add to that would be that not just the decimation, of our lands and our forests and the people that protect them and that live within them, that continue to maintain these ways, these sacred ways, even here in the Western world, that are in their own, not bubbles, but their own ecosystems of trying to survive in a very colonial paradigm of in being oppressed, our indigenous people here in America, the various nations. There's lots of nations of sovereign tribes and aren't given that recognition. And then they have practices, for example, the Native American Church, and I see
True.
and the peyote way, it's peyote way. It's a way of living. And we do have to be mindful and careful for what we seek out in this movement of what we feel we are entitled to, and what that entitlement can do as far as contributing to, again, the decimation and destruction of alongside surviving culture. In the decriminalizing movement, they included in California verbiage from the get of including the NAC and peyote, and they never even consulted with the elders and the leaders within the NAC and the peyote community. They didn't consult with them, and because of that, there are potential ramifications that could undo their protection of what they have maintained, and also not only destroy their ways and their protection, be a threat to it, to the protection of them practicing their long-standing traditions, but even contribute to the total mishandling and disrespect and even disappearance of peyote, of the grandfather of this sacred plant that is part of the ancestors, that nobody owns spirituality. I think that is something that we all can agree on. But culture is owned and identity is owned and survival is important. And it has been their way of surviving. And so, writing in new laws that will undo other laws that could threaten their existence, what has kept them clean from alcohol, what has gotten them clean from alcohol and substances, what has helped them heal from sexual abuse and trauma and just, the physical abuse and all of that. These medicines are powerful. And when you get into the politics of it, you really have to form relationships. You really have to form relationships to the plant, to the medicine, to the people, the tradition keepers and carriers. You have to care. You have to care. You have to know what community really means. And you can't just march forward saying you're going to do whatever you want, take whatever you want. That's the colonizer. That's why we're here. This is since 1492 that's been going on, and it hasn't really worked. In fact, it's what got everything scheduled. In fact, it's what happened with Manson. In fact, it's what's happening at the state capitol here in Michigan. And so, being conscious, being a real conscious community of what can harm, not just those aspects of it, but even the people who are well-meaning and get, I don't even know, loosey-goosey is the word that's coming to mind. It's not even something I use. I've heard other people say it, but it seems appropriate for the things that I see in these communities where people don't know what to do with the sexual energy or energies that are very chaotic and not stable, and they harm other people. People, women have been, and men too, have been raped and taken advantage of and silenced and in these communities. And I do see that come through the work, both myself, my husband, and other clinicians, other people that do this type of work that come through that say, I don't know what the heck is going on out there with these people and why they think it's okay to put their hands on other people, especially in those ways, and to have sex with people that they're offering healing to, like, especially if, there's history of trauma. And so, these are all things that we have to work out and figure out and heal from and recreate what community is. We have to, it's all related. It's all related, and not to doom and gloom it, because there's a lot of beauty in that, and there's a lot of healing, and there's a lot of empowerment in that. And it's a really, again, humbling and big responsibility and awesome to be involved in. I feel the weight of the responsibility as well as the joy of being able to be a part of that for other people, to help them in this other way. Here's another another way through, another tool, so I don't know.
That was great. This is awesome. Thanks for your words. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a good job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to connect is all, really.
It's good. It's working.
Yeah.
I appreciate the dialogue.
Yeah, so do I. I love the direction we're taking with this, and being able to just kind of connect with everything that we're talking about is awesome. Like, I love communicating. Yeah, it's the best. Okay, are there any other questions that I would like to ask you? So how long, or if ever, do you feel like, because I do know, like, up to now there are like clinical trials being done. Like, I do know like psilocybin has been decriminalized, I believe, in like Colorado. I don't know if any other states have been. Do you know anything around that subject or topic?
So it's very political.
Yeah, true.
And so talking about the decriminalizing movement, I've dipped in and out. I seem to be someone who sits on the fringe to see what's going on, to see who I can align myself with and who I probably should be a little cautious about, and to be informed myself, and what's going on, because it affects me, whether or not I'm a psychedelic integrationist therapist. But the decriminalizing movement in California, there's 2 areas because there's cities, it's not the entire state, there's cities that they decriminalize. Yeah, and in California, they went as far as being able to decriminalize, I believe it was the majority of plant medicine. So like, you would have to look at it, but there's 2 cities. So it's by city. The states aren't at that level yet.
That's weird, isn't it?
They're not that amenable or open to this movement. So it's approaching it from city to city. It's a domino effect. It's there's enough people amassed in one area that are going to be responsible wanting this, and they've shown their city leaders that this is how we can do it, how we can create a healthy, stable, functioning, safe community around this that can benefit all. And unfortunately, and an aspect of that is money, and so it's always the tricky thing with it is like, you can make this much money off of it. So turning a profit into it, but that's how they turn their ear for them to listen. That's how they get the door. So there's a concern about that. They're going to, sort of bastardize or commodify these medicines, and unfortunately in that process, potentially put it in the hands again of like people like pharmacists.
Yeah. And, big pharma is a major problem.
Patenting things, I think it's, I don't know who they are. The UK group, heard a lot of really bad things about them, and they patent psilocybin, like a synthesized version of psilocybin. And so when this stuff all rolls out, they've got their little, hands in the bucket of,
the honeypot.
The first ones out to be able to do retreat centers and research and all that sort of stuff. So it's, there's a colonization thing going on there, commodifying the sacred, and we got to figure that out.
Yeah, it's like who's determined to lay out these rituals and who's qualified enough. It's like,
and where are they growing these things? Are they growing them according to the original instructions of nature? Or are they growing them in a lab, and how is that going to have an effect on these medicines?
It's like all synthetic and pesticides, they're using chemicals. And that's the thing about dispensaries too. It's like, we want the bud that has the most crystals and the dankiest dank stuff. And it's like, is it all about senses now? Like, do you have to see it look good? Do you have to smell it to determine that it's well off going into your system? And that could be the same way that they're going to take that turn into, like you said, psilocybin or mushrooms. It's like, we want the biggest, baddest, mushrooms. Then you gotta have to grow really big, and so we gotta do whatever it takes to do that. But then no one asks the questions of, okay, well, how does that interfere with your experience? Like, really, and same with marijuana. Like, you don't know whether if some marijuana that was grown just naturally out in the forest or like wherever it grew and, you know, you harvested it and you smoked it, is that a different experience compared to highly potent, like, you know, very high potent induced like chemicals, you know, at a dispensary? Yeah, you'll probably get more messed up with the dispensary stuff, but are you getting messed up off of THC and the cannabinoids, or what if the chemicals are actually making you feel a certain way? And there's also talks about how marijuana isn't addictive. Okay, that's a good point, and there's a lot of arguments about that. I firmly believe that originally it wasn't addictive, just a natural plant, but now, like because of dispensaries and everything else, because of money, really, I feel like they've curated it in a way to where now it is addictive, because may not because of the THC, because THC is not addictive, is it what they say? But what if there's more chemicals that are within this plant, or that they put on this plant, that are making it addictive? It's like, oh, now you need it. You no longer want it. You need it because of some extra chemicals that we put on there so that we know you'll come back around, which is like, that's a big conspiracy theory. I haven't done any research. I'm not like you know,
It's a thought coming out.
yeah, it's not like a firm belief.
It's what you're hearing to diaspora.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just trying to tune into that little idea that's out there and just kind of throw some light on it.
Well, they did it with the first medicine. They did it with tobacco.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they do it with cannabis?
Yeah, look at nicotine. Like at first it wasn't as bad, right? It was just nicotine, like just tobacco. And, you know, you got the classic grandpa dude who has his like Sherlock Holmes pipe or whatever. And now it like they curated nicotine in a way where it's like, you know, in cigarettes, but then they have like all that rat poison and like all this, like, I don't know how many chemicals are in it, but it's not just nicotine. And they have the different reasons for it. Like, oh, well, we don't, you know, we want it to burn. You want it to burn slowly, right? Yeah, I want it to burn slowly. All right, well, we have to add this chemical. Like, they think they're catering to what we want, but in reality, it's doing harm to us because we aren't well informed enough to know what we want, to know what we need, and to know what's really ultimately bad for us. Like, what if dispensary marijuana is actually bad for us? What if it creates more paranoia because we're intaking unknown chemicals within our bodies compared to just regular good old THC, you know, marijuana? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. And it's those are all really valid and good questions to ask. You know, this is how you protect yourself and how you know, be safe. This is how you make informed decisions. And, you know, to respond to that, there's a few things that, you know, I'm obligated to, just as, you know, my own standards, as well as my professional ethics of, you know, being, you know, of help, of assistance, of doing no harm and getting the right information out there. Cannabis does have an addictive quality to it, a psychological component to it. And it's not even just what's in the dispensaries. It's much more rare. But there is a specific, you know, type of personality and, you know, chemical mindset, if you want to say that. We don't have the research because it's been, you know, scheduled away, and we haven't had the access to the research, to, you know, the labs and the funds and all that to do this sort of stuff. And so we are kind of in the dark about that. And hopefully with this whole new movement towards opening up to that, we can really get to these, you know, these questions and not have it just be conspiracy theory or, you know, this anxiety. We're up in the middle of the night about like, oh my gosh, where did I smoke?
Yeah, like seriously.
What did it do to me? And so,
yeah, you never. Yeah,
but at the same time, you know, like it does have an addictive quality to it, and it's not like the other addictions, but there is that potential there. And so they're adding these other things in there, like they've done to tobacco. You could definitely end up with, you know, some really bad stuff, in addiction or some kind of like biological problem or something that's going on because of what it's done to you. And, you know, at the same time, with, you know, discussing that is this movement of decriminalizing is, you know, this whole like offering up, like we want this, so we'll do this in exchange. You know, we're going to go the route of profiting off of it or giving something to you and you can make money. And in that process, what are we giving away? You know, are we giving it away to these corporations and not to the people? And are we giving it away to places that are like these entities who are patenting?
Yeah.
You know, synthesized versions, which are controlled versions, so that way maybe down the line, potentially could they stamp out the natural way
Yeah.
or really limit the natural way of growing your own, of having your own, and you have to go to them as a source.
Shit.
Maybe they don't have those intentions, but somebody along the line can have those intentions.
Yeah.
And it can be easily turned into that, because that's politics. That's politics. So when you make it political, which is what they're doing with decriminalizing, which is the route that has to be taken, you have to be clear and coherent on what you're doing and consider that, and get all community leaders involved, especially those who've been doing this for longer and who have even actually had any involvement with the law and creating laws to protect it, to say that's a loophole, you don't want it, you're this or that. And meeting of the minds, the respect of each other's intelligence and survival in it, and moving forward together and a coexistence. And so with that, it's like, I hear you on it. I hear you on it. And you are not the first person, or probably will be the last person that I've had a similar conversation about this with, because it's happening right now, and unfortunately not enough people are having this conversation.
Yeah.
And, it's going to affect even those who aren't having the conversations or care to have it. So, that's what I have to kind of contribute on that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I feel like we've been running for a pretty good while, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
we went on for a while. I like this. We'll end it soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah, this is good. This is awesome. I love it. We'll end it soon, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's good, because I got my little ones I got to get back to.
Okay, I feel you. Okay. One last little kind of thing I want to just throw out there. I want to be able to help people who are frightened and afraid of this psychedelic experience, especially when they're entering into the psychedelic world. And this has happened in my life to where I wasn't there, but my friend who I, helped into the world of psychedelics decided that it was a good idea to also help a friend by introducing this, as well. But he, unlike me, I feel like wasn't well informed enough or care enough. I don't know exactly how to say it about his friend, because he was trip sitting with his friend and they dosed on LSD, blah, blah, blah. They're having a great time and they're peaking. And my first friend that I introduced decided it was a good idea to give, the other individual that he's with introducing to psychedelics, he decided it was a good idea to give him a dab, which is a dab out of a bong, which is pure THC, while they were peaking.
It's pretty strong stuff.
And he took the dab and he literally had a psychotic breakthrough. He freaked out. And by the story that I was given, I'm glad I wasn't there. That's how scary it was. And to be able to deal with it is hard enough, but the individual who I know very well closely is still a friend of mine, and I touch base with him every now and then. I don't know, I feel like he's been different ever since, but in his experience, he was really paranoid. He started saying that something was chasing him, something was after him. He grabbed his phone and slammed it and broke it on the floor. He ran outside with the shirt off, with no shoes, in the middle of the night. Just, the classic story that's portrayed in the media, oh, this is the bad trip, this is what it does to you. Yeah and that's also something that's kind of sits in my mind about how people need to have the right, and people who are interested need to have the right people around them who know how to do it, and know how to do it properly kind of guideline. Because I mentioned, it sucks to see someone who gets introduced to psychedelics and leave with the bad experience and say, I'm never again, screw that. And I hate, and that sucks, well, there's nothing I can do for this person. It happened, but if only I would have been there, if only I could have, influenced this individual in a certain way to make them, open up again or think differently. And that's just something, us specifically, and just in that, you know, world that we're in, need to kind of do better at, I suppose. But that's just kind of my closing thoughts that I have.
Yeah, it's a big part of, you know, why I kind of continue doing what I'm doing. You know, to touch upon the question you asked earlier about, you know, whether or not when I was earlier on exposed to these things, you know, did I do it by myself? Did I do it with others? And, you know, there were times that I did do it with others, and I did experience those things with other people, and that stuff is pretty scary.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous, you know, having a psychotic break, or having, I think what you would describe, what you had described would be more like a breakdown than a breakthrough. Because a breakthrough would have been, he would have came from it, and he would have been able to process it and make something out of it that was meaningful, and helped him grow and heal, and instead of, you know, traumatize him and totally maybe potentially create more PTSD, you know, or create a new PTSD. And so I think some people would answer this in so many different ways, depending on what their background is, and with obviously not being his therapist or your therapist and being in that role, that these aren't, you know, giving that whole like this isn't psychotherapy. But if I've heard people who are medicine keepers, Christian keepers, who do these things, and they sometimes say maybe that was the medicine that he needed. You know, maybe he needed. Maybe he didn't need to keep doing it. You know, it's not for everybody. And maybe
one and done.
Maybe he needed to maybe he needs to revisit it and see, you know, if he wants to get anything from it, or if he's just like, I'm good. It was an experience. I had it. I'm glad it's over. And that's a medicine alone. You know, that's medicine alone for that. And other people, you know, I might want to be encouraging for him to continue forward on it, but that's his decision and his choice. And it's not something that anyone should take away from him. You know, they go, I'm responsible for introducing him, and he was harmed and all of this sort of stuff. He was making a decision.
Yeah, because
he was making the decision based on what, you know, he was told.
Yeah.
But,
my first friend feels really, to this day, feels really responsible for that, like, encouragement. Hey, you should do this while you're, you know, peaking. But, and it's something that I told him, it's like, it's something that you already did and you can't look back on it. You kind of have to forgive yourself and just kind of, you know, speak with your other friend and say, hey, like, I didn't know this was going to happen. Obviously, you know, can you forgive me? You know, no harm was intended, but I'm here for you. But that's just really it.
And that's healing. And it's important to do that. That's important to do that, to try to have some closure on it, and to take accountability in that, and to, you know, own up to how you might have potentially contributed to the harm, and learn from that, you know, so it's not repeated again. And those are hard life lessons to learn from this, but it's not for everybody. And
facts.
It takes a lot of work, and I don't know what some people out there are doing with this whole like good vibe only thing, and that it's the answer. And sometimes I think, I'm like, I don't know what medicine they're taking, because the things that I hear that come through my office, and the things that I see in my own eyes and my own experiences, I'm like, you know, okay, well, yeah, guys, multitude of experiences out there. So, I mean, be safe, I guess, and inform yourself as best as you can, and try to find an elder or, you know, respectful person that, you know, shows respect to themselves and those immediately around them, and how they handle making mistakes, how they handle not knowing everything, because you're not going to know everything. If somebody claims to know it all and they know everything, I don't know. I might
skeptical.
Good, healthy skepticism is so I don't know. That would be my response.
Sweet. I appreciate it. Well, Dr. Angela Beers, it was nice talking to you, and I'm forever grateful for you opening up and you know, willing to spare me some time as well. Like it means a lot to me. Like I value time so much, and the fact that you're able to be open for this experience, it really shows a lot about who you are and what you're trying to do, and that kind of purpose you're trying to fulfill. And with that, like, you are a huge like role model, And I know that's kind of weird to say, and I barely know you, but it's like you're part of my growth here today. And like this single day alone, like I appreciate you for this experience and for what you're doing as well. And you know, time is something that people can't really give back. So I appreciate it so very much. People can find you on Instagram, right? Shadow.medicine, if I'm correct.
I think if you type in just Dr. Angela Beers, it'll come up, or Shadow Medicine. I have my website, shadowmedicine.com. My private practice that I share with my husband is called Crescent Roots Psychological Services. We have a couple clinicians that work with us, and we try to walk the talk. And so our individuals are diverse in various ways, and they're very skilled, and very proud of being part of their journey. And so those are individuals too that are interested in this work, and they're newer into the field, and so they're, you know, kind of like yourself, like trying to figure out, like, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? And just affiliating themselves with us, and bringing them along for the journey. So they're brave. You could find me that way. I have a very limited schedule because I'm a mom, and I like to work deeply with people, so I only have a small caseload at a given time. And so right now, like as I mentioned earlier, because of COVID, we're mostly online. And then once we can figure out what's going on with this, so we can start doing groups and things like that, we are going to be having retreats and stuff like that. We're also moving back to our roots in Colorado. We put down a few years back. So we're leaving Michigan here pretty soon. Huh. Yeah. And
that's exciting.
COVID made us make the decision a little bit earlier. So there was a good thing out of that, and it's all good. And so Denver, to answer your question earlier, is another city that has decriminalized psilocybin, only psilocybin. So Michigan here at Ann Arbor is trying to work on that. I'm not sure what's going on there. They kind of align themselves with U of M, which for me, again, decolonizing is a little concerning. You know, you're getting big pharma in there because that's what U of M represents. But I don't know. So
yeah, listeners out there, feel free to reach out to Dr. Angela Beers. She's an awesome and amazing person, and I'm glad I met her. Like I said, feel free to reach out to her.
Cool.
She has an awesome Instagram page. Is there any other pages out there? I'm sure there's just Instagram, or just want to keep it with Instagram. But yeah, reach out to Dr. Angela Beers. I mean, she's based in Michigan, but she's more open and willing to do online sessions
I work as a psychologist. I'm licensed as a psychologist in both Michigan and Colorado, but I can work in a psychotherapeutic way, not psychological services, in other states. So it all depends. So, people reach out, they can ask those questions, and we can figure out if we work well together and what I can offer and stuff. So,
well, there you go. Well, you guys heard it. Thank you once again. I appreciate your time.
Yep.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good day.
You too. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.